Margaret had always been an early riser. Even at 73 years old, she'd wake up with the sun, make herself a cup of tea, and sit by the kitchen window watching the neighborhood come to life. Her house on Elm Street wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Every corner held a memory. The worn armchair where her husband used to read the newspaper. The small garden out back where she still grew tomatoes every summer. The creaky third step on the stairs that they'd always meant to fix but never did. These days, the house felt bigger than it used to. Quieter, too. Her husband had been gone for 15 years now, and without any children, Margaret's daily routine had become predictable and small. She'd water her plants, do a bit of cleaning, maybe drive to the store if she needed groceries. Once a week, she'd meet her friend Ruth for coffee at the diner downtown. That was about it. People always asked if she got lonely. Margaret would smile and say she was fine, and mostly that was true. She'd made peace with her quiet life. But sometimes, late at night, the silence pressed in a little too heavy. Sometimes she wondered if her life had mattered much at all. No kids to carry on her name. No grand career or achievements. Just one ordinary woman living one ordinary life in one ordinary house. It was mid-October, and the weather had turned cold and wet. Margaret hated driving in the rain. Her old sedan wasn't what it used to be, and her eyesight wasn't great after dark, but she'd run out of her blood pressure medication, and the pharmacy closed at 6, so she didn't have much choice. She grabbed her purse, pulled on her coat, and headed out into the drizzle. The pharmacy visit took longer than expected. The young pharmacist was new and couldn't find her prescription right away. By the time Margaret got back to her car, the drizzle had turned into a full downpour. Rain hammered against the windshield so hard her wipers could barely keep up. The streets were slick and shiny under the streetlights. She gripped the steering wheel tight and drove slowly. Leaning forward to see better, that's when she spotted him. A boy, maybe 15 or 16, standing at the bus stop on the corner of 5th and Main. He wasn't just waiting under the shelter like a normal person would. He was standing right out in the open, getting absolutely soaked. His jacket looked thin, completely useless against this kind of rain. Water was streaming down his face and dripping off his nose. His backpack hung heavy on his shoulders, probably full of wet books. He had his arms wrapped around himself, shivering. Margaret's first instinct was to keep driving. She didn't know this kid. These days, people warned you about picking up strangers. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had told her just last week about some scary story she'd seen on the news. But something made Margaret slow down. Maybe it was the way the boy stood there, so small and miserable in the rain. Maybe it was remembering her own son, the one she'd never had but always imagined. Maybe she was just tired of being cautious and invisible. She pulled up to the curb and rolled down the passenger window. Rain immediately started spattering onto her seat. "Excuse me?" she called out. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" The boy looked up, startled. For a second, he just stared at her with these big dark eyes, rain running down his face. He looked scared and hopeful at the same time. Margaret could see him thinking it over, weighing his options. Stay in the rain or trust some random old lady in a beat-up car? "I don't want to be any trouble," he finally said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "You're not trouble," Margaret said firmly. "You're going to catch pneumonia out here. Come on, get in." He hesitated one more second, then jogged around to the passenger side and climbed in. Water poured off him onto her cloth seats, but Margaret didn't say a word about it. The boy sat stiffly, trying to take up as little space as possible. He smelled like rain and wet clothes and teenage boy. "Thank you so much," he said quietly. "I really appreciate this. Where are you headed?" Margaret asked, turning up the heat. "Riverside Gardens, the apartments on the east side. But you can drop me anywhere near there. I don't want to take you out of your way." Margaret knew those apartments. They were the low-income housing on the other side of town, at least 20 minutes from here. Maybe more in this rain. In weather like this, that walk would take the poor kid an hour. "Riverside Gardens it is," she said, pulling back into traffic. "I'm Margaret, by the way." "Daniel," the boy said. "Daniel Torres." They drove in silence for a few minutes. Margaret kept sneaking glances at him. He was trying to wring water out of his jacket sleeves without dripping all over her car. His sneakers were so worn she could see his socks through a hole in one toe. The backpack between his feet looked ready to burst. "You got caught in the storm?" she asked. Daniel nodded, looking embarrassed. "I was at the library, studying for a test. I didn't realize how late it got, and when I came out, the bus had already gone. My pass expired last week, and I haven't been able to get a new one yet." "The library, huh? You must be a good student. Daniel shrugged, but she could see a little pride in his face. I want to go to college. Get a scholarship, hopefully. That's wonderful, Margaret said warmly. What do you want to study? Engineering, maybe. I'm good at math and science. I like figuring out how things work. He paused, then added more quietly, if I can make it work financially, I mean. There was something in his voice that made Margaret's heart squeeze. She'd heard that tone before. It was the sound of a kid trying to dream big while the weight of reality pressed down on his shoulders. She wanted to tell him it would all work out. That hard work always paid off. But she'd lived long enough to know that wasn't always true. Sometimes good kids who studied hard still got left behind. They pulled up to the apartment complex 20 minutes later. The building looked tired, with cracked concrete and flickering exterior lights. A group of teenagers were hanging out under the covered entrance trying to stay dry. Daniel saw them and his face changed. He looked suddenly anxious. This is perfect, thank you so much, he said quickly, already reaching for the door handle. Wait, Margaret said. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a $5 bill. Take this. Get yourself something warm to drink. No, I can't, Daniel protested, his cheeks flushing red. You already helped me enough. Please, Margaret insisted. It would make me feel better. Daniel looked at the money, then at her face. Finally, he took it with a reluctant nod. Thank you, really, this was really kind of you. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain. As he hurried toward the building, Margaret heard one of the teenagers call out something and laugh. She couldn't make out the words, but she saw Daniel's shoulders hunch up. He disappeared inside without looking back. Margaret sat there for a moment, watching the rain stream down her windshield. She felt oddly sad. She'd tried to help, but somehow it hadn't felt quite right. She'd seen the shame in Daniel's eyes when she offered money. She'd seen how embarrassed he was getting dropped off by some old lady in front of his friends. Kindness was supposed to feel good, but right now it just felt complicated. As she drove home through the storm, Margaret couldn't stop thinking about that boy. About his worn shoes and his dreams of college. About the way he'd said, if I can make it work. Financially, like he was already preparing for disappointment, she wondered if she'd ever see him again. Something told her this wasn't over. Margaret couldn't get Daniel out of her head. For the next few days, she found herself thinking about him at odd moments. While making breakfast, she'd wonder if he'd had anything to eat. While watching the evening news, she'd hope he'd stayed dry. She told herself she was being silly. She'd given one kid a ride in the rain. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The following week, Margaret had to go back to the pharmacy for a prescription refill. She deliberately took the same route home, even though it added 10 minutes to her drive. She told herself she wasn't looking for Daniel. She was just curious. But when she passed that same bus stop and saw him standing there again, soaked to the bone in another rainstorm, her heart did a little jump. This time she didn't hesitate. She pulled right up to the curb. We have to stop meeting like this, she said through the window, trying to sound cheerful. Daniel looked up and his face went through about 5 different expressions. Surprise, relief, then something that looked a lot like embarrassment. He glanced around to see if anyone was watching before he opened the door and got in. Mrs. Patterson, he said quietly. Thank you. I didn't think I'd see you again. Well, here I am. Same place, same rain, same soggy teenager. Daniel managed a small smile, but she could tell something was bothering him. He was even more tense than last time. He sat with his backpack clutched on his lap like a shield. His clothes were just as wet, just as worn. She noticed a piece of duct tape holding one strap of his backpack together. As they drove, Margaret tried to make conversation. How was your test? The one you were studying for? Got an A, Daniel said, and there was that flash of pride again. Of course you did. I can tell you're smart. My mom says school is my way out, Daniel said. Then he went quiet, like he'd revealed too much. Margaret understood what he meant without him having to explain. She'd grown up poor too. Back in the 1950s, she remembered what it felt like to want things you couldn't have, to feel like everyone else was playing life on easy mode while you struggled on hard. When they got close to Riverside Gardens, Daniel suddenly spoke up. Could you maybe drop me off at the corner? Before we get to the building? Margaret felt her stomach sink. Of course, honey. Wherever you want. She pulled over a block away from the apartments. Daniel grabbed his backpack and opened the door, but before he got out, he turned to look at her. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how. "I really am grateful," he finally said. "I know you don't have to do this. I just don't want people to think I'm charity case or something. It's already hard enough," and there it was, the thing that had been sitting heavy in the air between them. Margaret felt her heart break a little bit. "Daniel," she said gently, "there's no shame in accepting help." "Maybe not for you," Daniel said, and his voice was tight. "But for me at school in my neighborhood, everything's already about who has money and who doesn't. I'm the kid with the free lunch program. I'm the kid who can't go on field trips that cost money. I'm the kid wearing his cousin's old clothes. When people see me getting out of some random old lady's car, they laugh. They think it's funny. And I know you're trying to be nice, but it just makes everything harder." He said it all in a rush, like he'd been holding it in for days. Then he looked horrified, like he couldn't believe he'd just said all that to her face. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "That was rude. You've been nothing but kind, and I'm being ungrateful." "No," Margaret said firmly. "You're being honest. And I appreciate that." They sat there for a moment in silence. Rain pattered on the roof. Margaret thought about her own life, about how she'd spent all these years trying to be helpful, trying to be a good person, but never really understanding what it cost someone to receive help. She'd never thought about how her kindness might feel to someone on the other side, how it might sting a little, even when it was offered with love. "I didn't mean to make things harder for you," she said softly. "I just saw you standing in the rain and remembered what it was like to be young and stuck." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know, and I really do appreciate it. I just wish the world was different, you know? I wish I didn't have to feel embarrassed about needing a ride. I wish my family had money for a car. I wish I didn't have to choose between staying late at the library and getting home before the last bus." "How many brothers and sisters do you have?" Margaret asked. "4. I'm the oldest. 2 brothers, 2 sisters. Our apartment has 2 bedrooms for all 7 of us. That's why I stay at the library. I can't study at home. There's no space, no quiet. My little brother has ADHD and he's loud. The baby cries. My mom works 2 jobs just to keep us fed." Margaret listened, really listened. She'd known he was poor, but hearing the details made it real in a way that hit different. This wasn't some abstract concept. This was a real kid with real problems trying to do homework in a public library because his home was too crowded and chaotic. "Your mom sounds like a strong woman," Margaret said. "She is," Daniel said, and his voice was full of fierce love. "She never complains. She just works. She tells us education is the way to break the cycle. She didn't get to finish high school, so she wants us to go to college, all of us. I don't know how we'll pay for it, but she believes we will." "And what do you believe?" Daniel was quiet for a long time. "I believe I have to try, even if it's hard, even if I fail, because if I don't try, then what was the point of everything she sacrificed?" Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. This kid was 16 years old and already carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. She wanted to help him so badly, but she'd already learned that help wasn't simple. It came with complications, with pride and shame and social dynamics she didn't fully understand. An idea had been forming in her mind all week. Now she decided to take a chance. "Daniel, I have a proposition for you, and I want you to think about it seriously before you answer." He looked at her warily. "Okay, my house needs work. The lawn needs mowing. The gutters need cleaning. There's painting to be done. My husband used to handle all that, but he's been gone for 15 years now, and I just can't do it anymore. My knees are shot and I get dizzy on ladders. I've been meaning to hire someone, but I keep putting it off because I hate having strangers around." She took a breath. "What if I hired you?" "You could come on Saturdays. I'd pay you $10 an hour. That's more than you'd make at most places that would hire someone your age. You'd be doing me a genuine favor and you'd be earning money, not charity. Wages for work." Daniel stared at her. She could see his mind working, trying to figure out if this was real or if it was pity dressed up as a job offer. "Is there really work?" he asked carefully. "Or are you just trying to help me?" Margaret looked him straight in the eye. "There's really work. Come see for yourself this Saturday. If you think I'm making it up, you can walk away. But I promise you, my house is falling apart. I genuinely need help." "Why me?" Daniel asked. "You don't even know me. Because I think you're the kind of person who'll show up on time and do good work. Because I think you're trustworthy. And because sometimes in life people cross paths for a reason. Maybe I was supposed to give you that ride in the rain. Maybe this is supposed to happen. Daniel bit his lip. She could see him struggling with his pride, his suspicion, his hope. Finally, he nodded slowly. Okay, I'll come Saturday, but if the work isn't real, I'm leaving. Deal, Margaret said. He gave her his phone number written on a scrap of paper from his backpack. She gave him her address. As he got out of the car, he paused one more time. Mrs. Patterson, thank you for listening. Not many adults actually listen. Call me Margaret, she said. And you're welcome. She watched him walk away into the rain, his shoulders a little straighter than before. As she drove home, Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Like maybe her life wasn't as small and pointless as she'd thought. Like maybe she still had something to offer the world. She just hoped she hadn't made things worse. She hoped this would work, because she had a feeling that if she let this kid down, it would break something in him that was already cracked. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Saturday morning came with clear skies and cool autumn air. Margaret woke up earlier than usual, nervous in a way she hadn't been in years. She made coffee, then looked around her house with fresh eyes. Had she oversold the amount of work that needed doing? What if Daniel took one look and realized she'd invented problems just to give him a job? But no, the more she looked, the more she saw. The gutters really were clogged with leaves. The lawn looked shaggy and unkempt. The paint on the back porch was peeling. The garden shed door hung crooked on its hinges. Years of small neglect had added up. She'd just stopped seeing it because she lived with it every day. At 9 o'clock sharp, her doorbell rang. When she opened it, Daniel stood on her porch in jeans and a t-shirt, looking nervous but determined. His hair was neatly combed. His shoes were still old and worn, but he'd clearly tried to make himself presentable. Good morning, Margaret said warmly. Right on time. My mom always says if you're on time, you're late, Daniel replied. So I left extra early. Margaret led him around the house, pointing out everything that needed attention. She watched his face carefully, looking for signs that he thought she was faking. But Daniel walked around examining things with serious focus. He tested the shed door, looked up at the gutters, ran his hand along the peeling paint. This is real work, he said finally, and she could hear the relief in his voice. This is going to take a while. So you'll do it? Yes, ma'am. I'll do it right too. My uncle taught me basic handyman stuff. I'm not an expert, but I'm careful and I pay attention. They agreed he'd start with the lawn. Margaret showed him where the mower was kept in the garage. It was old and temperamental, but Daniel got it started after a few tries. As he pushed it across the yard, Margaret went inside and started preparing lunch. She made chicken soup from scratch and fresh bread. She set the table like she was expecting company, using the good dishes she usually saved for holidays that never came. Around noon, she went out to check on him. Daniel had finished the lawn and moved on to raking leaves. His t-shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool weather. He worked with steady focus, making neat piles of leaves along the fence. Time for a break, Margaret called. Lunch is ready. Daniel looked surprised. Oh, you don't have to feed me. I brought a sandwich. I made enough for an army. Come inside and wash up. He hesitated, then followed her in. She could see him taking in her home. The old photographs on the walls. The worn but comfortable furniture. The kitchen that smelled like bread and soup. He washed his hands at the sink and sat down at the table, looking uncomfortable. This is really nice of you, he said quietly. It's just soup. But they both knew it wasn't just soup. It was a warm house and a full table and someone who'd made an effort. For Daniel, who came from a crowded apartment where dinner was often whatever his tired mother could throw together quickly, this was something special. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Margaret started asking him questions. Easy ones at first. What subjects did he like at school? What kind of engineering was he interested in? Had he always been good at math? Daniel opened up slowly. He told her about his science teacher who encouraged him. About how he'd taught himself advanced math from library books because his school didn't offer the classes he needed. About how he'd started tutoring other kids for a few dollars a session. The more he talked, the more Margaret saw what was underneath the quiet, careful exterior. This kid was hungry. Not just for food, though she suspected that was true too. He was hungry for opportunity, for chances, for someone to believe in him. You remind me of my husband, Margaret said suddenly. He grew up poor too. Worked his way through college doing odd jobs. He used to say that when you grow up with nothing, you learn to see possibilities where other people just see problems. What did he do? Daniel asked. He was a teacher. High school history. Never made much money, but he loved it. He said teaching was his way of passing on what he'd been given. That's nice, Daniel said, that he found something he loved. What about you? Do you love engineering or is it just practical? Daniel thought about that. Both, I guess. I love how math can solve real problems, how you can design something on paper and then build it in the real world. But yeah, it's also practical. Engineers make good money. I could help my family, get my mom to retire early, make sure my little brothers and sisters have what they need. There it was again, that weight he carried, the sense that his dreams weren't just his own. They belonged to his whole family. After lunch, Daniel went back to work. He spent the rest of the afternoon on the gutters, climbing up Margaret's ladder with a bucket and gloves. Every so often, Margaret would peek out the window to check on him. She told herself it was to make sure he was safe, but really she was just watching the careful, thorough way he worked, taking his time, doing it right. At 5 o'clock, she called him in. She'd prepared an envelope with $50 in it. 5 hours at $10 an hour. When she handed it to him, Daniel opened it and counted the bills, then looked at her with wide eyes. This is too much. That's what we agreed on. But you fed me lunch. That should count for something. The lunch was my choice. This is your wages. You earned it. Daniel folded the money carefully and put it in his pocket. Thank you. Really. This is going to help a lot. As he was leaving, Margaret made a decision. Same time next Saturday? There's plenty more work to do. Daniel nodded, smiling for the first time all day. A real smile that reached his eyes. I'll be here. After he left, Margaret stood in her doorway looking at her freshly mowed lawn. The yard looked better than it had in years. But more than that, the house felt different. Less empty. Less pointless. Like it had remembered what it was for. The pattern continued week after week. Every Saturday, Daniel showed up exactly on time. He worked hard and carefully. He fixed the shed door. He painted the porch. He cleaned out the garage. And every Saturday, Margaret made lunch. They'd sit at her kitchen table and talk. Really talk. Not the surface-level conversation of strangers, but real communication. She told him about her husband, about growing up during the Depression, about what it was like to get old. He told her about school, about his family, about his dreams and fears. One Saturday in November, Daniel showed up looking upset. He worked quietly all morning, none of his usual steady focus. At lunch, Margaret didn't push. She just put soup in front of him and waited. Finally, he spoke. My guidance counselor said I should think about community college instead of university. Said it's more realistic given my circumstances. Margaret felt anger flash through her. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. But Mrs. Patterson, what if she's right? What if I'm aiming too high? University is expensive. Even with scholarships, there's living expenses and books and everything else. Maybe I should be more practical. Margaret set down her spoon carefully. Daniel, let me tell you something. The world is full of people who will tell you to aim lower, who will tell you to be realistic, who will try to fit you into a small box because it's easier than watching you break out of it. Don't you dare let them. But what if I fail? Then you fail. But you fail reaching for something big, not settling for something small. You're one of the smartest kids I've ever met. You work harder than anyone has a right to expect. You deserve to go as far as your mind can take you. Daniel's eyes got shiny. Why do you believe in me so much? You barely know me. I know you well enough. I know you show up on time every week. I know you do good work. I know you're putting yourself through school while helping support your family. I know you've got more determination in your little finger than most people have in their whole body. That's enough. Something shifted in that moment. Daniel's shoulders straightened. The doubt in his eyes cleared a little. You really think I can do it? I know you can. The only question is whether you believe it too. From that day on, Daniel worked with new energy. He started talking about his college applications, about the essays he was writing, about the scholarships he was applying for. Margaret helped him practice interview skills. She read his essays and gave feedback. She became his unofficial college advisor, cheerleader, and grandmother all rolled into one. The week he got his acceptance letter to State University with a full academic scholarship, he ran all the way to her house after school. He burst through her door, waving the letter, yelling and laughing. Margaret grabbed him in a tight hug, both of them crying and celebrating. You did it, she said, holding his face in her hands. You did it. We did it, Daniel corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have. But I'm glad you didn't have to. 3 years of Saturdays. 3 years of work and lunch and conversation. 3 years of a lonely old woman and a struggling teenager, building something neither of them had expected. Not just a cleaner house and a college fund, but family. The kind you choose. The kind that matters. When graduation day came, Margaret sat in the high school auditorium wearing her best dress. When they called Daniel's name for the Academic Excellence Award, she clapped so hard her hands hurt. Afterward, he found her in the crowd and hugged her tight. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. For seeing me. For believing in me. Thank you, Margaret whispered back. For letting me be part of your life. You saved me too, you know. Daniel pulled back, confused. I saved you? You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. You made my life matter again. They stood there in the middle of the celebrating crowd, an old woman and a young man, connected by something deeper than blood, connected by choice and kindness and 3 years of showing up for each other. That was the turning point. The moment when both of them understood that what had started as a simple transaction had become something much bigger, something that would echo through both their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. 20 years passed like water through fingers. Daniel kept his promise to himself, to his mother, and to Margaret. He went to State University and threw himself into his engineering studies with the same focused determination he'd shown mowing her lawn. His first year was rough. The other students seemed to have money for things he couldn't afford. They had laptops and cars and new clothes. But Daniel remembered Margaret's words about aiming high, and he pushed through. He graduated with honors. Got a job at a small engineering firm. Worked his way up. Met a woman named Linda at a work conference. She was a project manager, smart and kind, and she didn't care that he'd grown up poor. They got married in a small ceremony. Had 2 daughters who became Daniel's whole world. The years were good to him. He changed jobs twice, each time moving to a better position. He bought his mother a small house so she could finally stop working 2 jobs. He helped put his younger siblings through college. He built the life he'd dreamed about in Margaret's kitchen all those years ago. But through it all, he never forgot Margaret. She'd been there for every milestone in those early years. His graduation from university. His first real job. His wedding. She'd held his first daughter when she was just 3 days old, tears streaming down her weathered face. For the first 5 years after he left for college, they stayed close. He'd drive to visit her every few months. They'd have lunch and talk for hours. She'd ask about his classes, his job, his life. He'd ask about her garden, her health, her friend Ruth. Then life got complicated the way it does. His job demanded more time. He had a baby, then another. His younger brother got into some trouble and needed help. His mother got sick. The visits became less frequent. Once every 6 months, then once a year. Then just cards at Christmas and her birthday. The last time Daniel saw Margaret, she was 82 years old. He'd stopped by on a Sunday afternoon with Linda and the girls. Margaret had moved slower. Her hands shook a little, but her mind was sharp as ever. She'd made cookies for the girls and told them stories about their daddy when he was young. When they left, Daniel had hugged her tight and promised he'd visit more often. But he didn't. The weeks turned into months. He sent letters, but they went unanswered. He told himself she was just busy. Or maybe she'd moved in with a relative somewhere. He'd call soon, next week for sure. Then one day, 5 years ago, Daniel had driven past Margaret's old house. He'd been in the area for work and decided to stop by as a surprise. But when he pulled up to the familiar address on Elm Street, a different family's car was in the driveway. Different curtains hung in the windows. A child's bike lay on the lawn where Margaret's garden used to be. Daniel knocked anyway. A young mother answered, holding a toddler on her hip. No, she'd never heard of Margaret Patterson. They'd bought the house from a bank 3 years ago. It had been empty for a while before that. Sorry she couldn't help more. Daniel stood on that porch feeling like someone had punched him in the chest. How had he lost track of her? When had she moved? Was she okay? He drove to the library and tried looking her up, but found nothing. No phone number. No forwarding address. It was like she'd disappeared. For 5 years, that guilt sat heavy in his chest. He'd been so busy building his life that he'd forgotten the woman who'd helped him believe it was possible. Every time he achieved something new, he thought about how he wanted to tell Margaret. But he couldn't. She was gone, and it was his fault. for not staying in touch. Then came 2023. Daniel's engineering firm won a big contract to design an affordable housing complex in his old neighborhood, the same area where he'd grown up in those cramped apartments. His boss put him in charge of the project. It felt like coming full circle. He'd spent years designing buildings all over the state, but this felt personal. This was for kids like he'd been, families like his had been. Part of the project involved community outreach. They needed to present their plans to local residents and get feedback. Daniel volunteered to handle it personally. One cold Tuesday morning in November, he walked into the Riverside Community Center, carrying his laptop and presentation boards. The center coordinator, a cheerful woman named Patricia, helped him set up in the multi-purpose room. "We've got about 20 residents signed up for your presentation," she said. "Mostly retirees from the senior wing. They're very invested in neighborhood development." "There's a senior wing here?" Daniel asked. "Oh yes. We have 32 apartments for elderly residents. It's income-based. Gives seniors who can't afford fancy retirement homes a place to live with dignity. We have activities, nurse visits, community meals. It's really nice." Something clicked in Daniel's mind. Income-based senior housing in his old neighborhood. Margaret had never had much money. Could she possibly be here? "Do you happen to know if any of your residents have lived in this area a long time? Like 40 or 50 years? His heart was pounding. Patricia thought for a moment. "Oh sure, Mrs. Patterson in room 14. She's been in this neighborhood forever. She moved into the senior wing about 6 years ago when her house became too much to maintain." Daniel felt the room tilt. "Mrs. Patterson? Margaret Patterson?" "Yes, do you know her?" He couldn't speak for a moment. "I used to. A long time ago. Is she here now? Is she okay?" "She's wonderful. A little slower these days. Uses a wheelchair now because of her arthritis, but sharp as a tack. Room 14. Down that hall if you want to say hello before your presentation." Daniel left his presentation materials right there. His hands were shaking as he walked down the corridor. Room 14. The number was painted on a wooden door. He stood there for a full minute trying to catch his breath. What would he say? Would she remember him? Would she be angry that he'd disappeared? Finally he knocked. "Come in," a voice called. It was weaker than he remembered, but it was definitely her. Daniel opened the door. The room was small but cheerful. Afternoon sunlight streamed through a window. Plants lined the sill, and there, sitting in a wheelchair with a blanket over her lap, was Margaret. Her hair was completely white now. Her face had more wrinkles. Her hands, resting on the blanket, were gnarled with arthritis. But when she looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, her blue eyes widened with recognition and wonder. "Daniel?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Hi, Margaret." His voice cracked. Tears were already streaming down his face. "I've been looking for you. My boy." Her hand started shaking as she reached toward him. "My boy, look at you." Daniel crossed the room in 3 quick steps and dropped to his knees beside her wheelchair. He took her twisted hands in his, so careful because they looked fragile. She touched his face with trembling fingers, tracing the changes 20 years had made. The lines around his eyes, the few gray hairs at his temples, the confidence that had replaced the scared teenager she'd known. "I thought I'd never see you again," Margaret said, tears running down her weathered cheeks. "I stopped writing because my hands hurt too much. I should have called. I should have found a way. No, it was my fault. I got busy with life and I let too much time pass. I'm so sorry. I went to your house 5 years ago and you weren't there. I tried to find you, but I couldn't. I've been carrying that guilt ever since." "Oh, Daniel." Margaret cupped his face with both hands. "You have nothing to apologize for. You were living your life. That's what you were supposed to do. I never expected you to take care of an old lady forever. But you took care of me. When no one else believed in me, you did. And then I just disappeared." "Tell me about your life," Margaret said, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "Tell me everything. Did you finish school? Did you become an engineer?" Daniel pulled a chair close to her wheelchair and talked. He told her about university, about meeting Linda, about his 2 daughters who were now 8 and 10 years old. He told her about his career, about helping his family, about the life he'd built. He pulled out his phone and showed her pictures. His daughters on their first day of school. His mother in front of her new house. His wedding day. Margaret looked at each photo with such joy and pride that Daniel had to keep wiping his eyes. "You did it," she kept saying. "You did exactly what I knew you would." Because of you, Daniel said firmly. You gave me more than rides in the rain and Saturday work. You gave me proof that I mattered, that someone saw me as more than just some poor kid. You treated me like family. You were family, Margaret said. You are family. The son I never had. The grandson who made my life make sense. They talked for 2 hours. Daniel completely forgot about his presentation until Patricia knocked on the door to remind him. The residents were waiting. Reluctantly, Daniel stood up. I have to go do this presentation, but I'm coming back. Tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day I possibly can. I'm not losing you again. Margaret smiled, that same warm smile he remembered from 20 years ago. I'm not going anywhere, dear. I'm right here. I've been right here all along. Daniel leaned down and kissed her forehead. I love you, Margaret. I should have said that 20 years ago, but I'm saying it now. I love you too, my boy. I always have. He gave his presentation in a daze, barely remembering what he said. All he could think about was Margaret in that room. Still here, still the same kind, strong woman who'd changed his life, still believing in him after all these years. After the presentation, he went straight back to her room. They made plans. He'd come visit every Sunday. He'd bring his wife and daughters to meet her. He'd make sure she had everything she needed. As he finally left that evening, walking to his car in the darkness, Daniel felt like a weight he'd been carrying for 5 years had finally lifted. He'd found her. Against all odds, in the place he least expected, he'd found her, and this time, he wasn't going to let her go. True to his word, Daniel came back the very next day, then the day after that. By the end of that first week, it had become routine. Every evening after work, he'd stop by room 14 for at least an hour. Sometimes Linda came with him. Sometimes he brought the girls. Sometimes he came alone and they'd just sit together talking about everything and nothing. Margaret told him about the 6 years she'd spent in the senior apartments, about how she'd sold her house when the stairs became too difficult and her arthritis made maintaining it impossible, about how scared she'd been to move into what she called an old folks' home, but how it had turned out to be a blessing. She had friends here, activities, people who checked on her. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was good. I thought about you all the time, she confessed one evening. Wondered if you'd made it, if you were happy, if you even remembered the old lady who gave you rides in the rain. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. I remembered. Every single day, every time I solved a difficult problem at work, I thought about those Saturdays in your kitchen. You teaching me that I was worth something. That's not something you forget. The Sunday visits became sacred. Daniel would arrive mid-morning with his family. Linda had taken to Margaret immediately, hugging her and calling her Mom Patterson. The girls, shy at first, quickly warmed up to this sweet old lady who asked them about school and told them stories about their daddy when he was young. Your father was so serious, Margaret told them one Sunday, her eyes twinkling, always working so hard, but he had the kindest heart. One time he spent his whole Saturday pay buying winter coats for his little brothers instead of keeping the money for himself. Daniel's daughter, Sophie, the older one, looked at him with new respect. Really, Dad? Margaret taught me that taking care of family matters more than anything, Daniel said simply. One Sunday in December, Daniel brought something special. He'd been working on it for weeks, and his hands were actually shaking as he pulled out the folder. Margaret, I need to show you something. He spread papers across her small table, architectural drawings, budget projections, grant applications. At the center was a rendering of a beautiful building with large windows and a garden courtyard. This is the affordable housing project I'm designing, Daniel explained. It's going to be built right here in Riverside. 300 units for low-income families. But that's not all. He pulled out another document, this one official looking with multiple signatures. I've established a scholarship fund. It's called the Margaret Patterson Scholarship for Engineering Students. It's specifically for kids from low-income families who want to study engineering. Full tuition, books, living expenses. Everything they need to succeed. The first scholarship will be awarded next fall. Margaret stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing. Tears started streaming down her face. Daniel, no! This is too much. You can't do this. Yes, I can, and I am. You changed my entire life with your kindness. Now other kids will get the same chance I got. They'll have someone believe in them the way you believed in me. Your name will help send dozens of kids to college, maybe hundreds over the years. But all I did was give you a ride in the rain. Margaret protested, her voice breaking. I just gave you a ride. Daniel knelt beside her wheelchair and took both her hands. No, you gave me so much more than that. You gave me dignity when I felt worthless. You gave me work when I needed purpose. You gave me family when I felt alone. You saw me, Margaret. Really saw me. Not as a poor kid or a charity case, but as a person with potential. That changed everything. Linda was crying too. The girls watched with wide eyes as their father and this old woman held on to each other, both of them sobbing. I don't deserve this, Margaret whispered. Yes, you do. You deserve to know that your life mattered, that your kindness rippled out into the world in ways you never imagined. Those kids who get the scholarship will go on to design buildings, bridges, technology. They'll help their families like I helped mine. They'll pay it forward. And it all started with you. Margaret pulled him into a hug, holding him as tight as her weak arms could manage. Thank you, she kept saying. Thank you. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Margaret had experienced in years. Daniel brought her updated photos from the housing project construction site. She met the first scholarship recipient, a shy girl named Rosa from a family of 6, whose eyes lit up when she talked about wanting to design sustainable buildings. Margaret told Rosa about meeting Daniel in the rain, and Rosa cried and hugged her and promised to make her proud. On Margaret's 93rd birthday in March, Daniel arranged a party in the community center's dining hall. He invited everyone from the senior apartments. He brought his whole family. He even tracked down his younger siblings who came with their families. Daniel's mother, now retired and healthy, held Margaret's hands and thanked her over and over for saving her son. You gave me back my boy, his mother said. When he was drowning, you threw him a rope. I could never repay that. The room was full of flowers and balloons and 3 generations of people whose lives Margaret had touched without even realizing it. Daniel's youngest daughter sang Happy Birthday off-key. His oldest made a speech about how her dad always said that family wasn't just blood, it was about who showed up for you. Margaret sat in her wheelchair in the middle of it all, overwhelmed and joyful. At one point, she leaned over to Daniel and whispered, I spent so many years thinking my life didn't matter because I never had children. I thought I'd leave nothing behind. You left me, Daniel said. You left every kid who'll get that scholarship. You left the example of what one person's kindness can do. That's a legacy worth more than anything. As spring turned to summer, Margaret's health began to decline. The nurses said it was just old age catching up to her. She was 93 after all. Daniel increased his visits, sometimes coming twice a day. He'd read to her when she was too tired to talk. He'd sit beside her bed and hold her hand. He'd tell her stories about work, about the girls, about life continuing in the world outside her small room. One evening in late August, Margaret was having a particularly good day. She was alert and talkative, more like her old self. Daniel had brought Chinese food, her favorite, and they were eating together while watching the sunset through her window. I need to tell you something, Margaret said suddenly. Something I should have said 20 years ago. What is it? After my husband died, I was so lonely, so lost. I'd wake up every morning wondering what the point was. Why keep going when no one needed me? When nothing I did seemed to matter. I was just waiting to die, really. She paused, looking at her gnarled hands. Then I saw you standing in that rain. And I picked you up not just to help you, but because I was desperate for purpose, for meaning. You gave me that, Daniel. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning. You made the last years of my husband's house feel less empty. You made me matter again. Daniel's throat was tight. Margaret, let me finish. People talk about how I helped you, but they don't understand. You saved me too. Every Saturday you showed up. Every lunch we shared, every conversation we had made my life worth living. So when you thank me, please know that I'm thanking you right back. We saved each other. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun paint the sky orange and pink. Finally, Margaret spoke again, her voice soft. I'm tired, Daniel. So tired, but I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not worried that my life was wasted. I know it wasn't. Because of you, I know my life had meaning. It had so much meaning, Daniel said, tears streaming down his face. You'll never know how much. Margaret passed away peacefully 3 weeks later in her sleep on a quiet Tuesday morning. Daniel got the call from the senior center just after 7 a.m. He sat in his car for 20 minutes before he could drive to see her one last time. The funeral was held at a small church near Riverside. Daniel had expected maybe 20 people. Instead, over 200 showed up. residents from the senior apartments, former students from his mother's old neighborhood who'd heard the story over the years. The first 5 scholarship recipients, including Rosa, now in her second year of engineering school, Daniel's entire extended family. Colleagues from his work who'd heard him talk about Margaret 1,000 times. Daniel gave the eulogy. He told the whole story. The rainy night, the Saturday job, the kitchen table conversations. 20 years apart, finding her again. The scholarship fund. He talked about how one moment of kindness can change not just one life, but dozens, hundreds, rippling out in ways we never see. Margaret used to worry that her life didn't matter because she never had children, Daniel said, his voice echoing in the quiet church, but she was wrong. She had me. She has Rosa and all the other scholarship students. She has everyone in this room whose life was touched by her kindness. That's not nothing. That's everything. He paused, looking at the simple casket. She taught me that the best investments we make aren't in things but in people. That showing up matters, that seeing someone truly seeing them can change their entire trajectory, and that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about a lonely old woman and a struggling teenager who found each other in the rain and decided to show up for each other. After the funeral, something unexpected happened. Story after story came out. An elderly man shared how Margaret had driven him to chemotherapy appointments when his family couldn't. A woman talked about how Margaret had taught her to read when she moved to America at 60. Another resident described how Margaret had organized a fundraiser when his apartment flooded. Daniel had thought he knew Margaret's story, but he'd only known part of it. She'd been quietly helping people for years in small ways, never asking for recognition, never keeping score. Just showing up when people needed someone. In the months that followed, Daniel threw himself into completing the housing project and expanding the scholarship fund. He added more money of his own. He recruited other donors. He set up mentorship programs pairing scholarship recipients with working engineers. He made sure every student who received the Margaret Patterson Scholarship also received the kind of emotional support and belief that Margaret had given him. The first building of the Riverside Housing Project opened 2 years later. At the dedication ceremony, Daniel unveiled a bronze plaque near the entrance. It read, "In memory of Margaret Patterson, who taught us that kindness is never small, and that one person who believes in you can change your entire life." Below that was a quote Daniel had found in one of Margaret's old letters. "We're not here to just exist. We're here to see each other, to show up, to believe in each other until we can believe in ourselves." Rosa, now in her final year of engineering school, gave a speech at the dedication. She talked about being the first in her family to go to college, about the fear and doubt she'd felt, and about receiving that scholarship and meeting Margaret and realizing she wasn't alone.